Yeah, so we're going to be presenting on multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS for short. If you have any questions, we just ask that you hold them to the end so we can get through everything, and we'll have dedicated time at the end for you to ask questions. But thank you all for coming for Saturday morning. We're really excited to present this information for you, and we hope that you learn a lot and take some things away. Before we begin, this presentation is funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, also known as OSEP. We're all students at Cal State Long Beach, and we're on a grant called CRISP, or Culturally Responsive Instruction and Intervention in Self-Determination Programs. Basically, what we do is our group of three will present self-determination curriculum for students in K through 12 with disabilities, just promoting self-determination skills, goal setting, just those skills you need for life. And then we also host parent trainings like this and then promote inclusion in the schools that we work at too. So thanks for coming. We'll just introduce ourselves briefly.
Hi guys, my name is Maddie and I'm a special education graduate student at Cal State Long Beach. Thank you for coming.
I'm Kathy Liu. I'm an education specialist, so a special education teacher at Twyla Reed. I do work for our district and I am getting my master's at Cal State Long Beach too. Thank you.
And then I'm Julia Sarti. I'm a school psychology graduate student at Cal State Long Beach. So thanks for coming, everyone. How do you? Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so first we're just going to go over the agenda for this training. First, we're going to talk about what is MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, and we're going to give you some general information about that. Then we're going to talk about the two frameworks that sort of fall under the umbrella of MTSS, and that is RTI, or response to intervention. That's the academic framework. And then the behavioral framework is PBIS, or positive behavior interventions and supports. Following that, we're going to talk about what is an SST and who is involved. And then we're going to wrap up by talking a little bit about special education and how special education relates to MTSS.
Okay, so what is MTSS? So MTSS is a comprehensive framework that aligns academic, behavioral, social and emotional learning and mental health supports in a fully integrated system of support for the benefit of all students. So at Savannah District, we do follow this model. So MTSS would include Common Core State Standards. So Common Core State Standards are the learning expectations that each student has to learn by the conclusion of the end of the year. We have core instruction, which happens in the general education classroom. We individualize our student needs based on their strengths and, any difficulties they have. We do the universal design of learning, which is the what, how, and why students learn. Response to intervention is where we look for, any academic or behavior gaps that students may have, and then we provide them additional support. PBIS addresses social and emotional learning outcomes, and then culturally responsive teaching is where we want to connect the students of our district with what they learn, so like their background and their culture.
Okay. And so MTSS is really a framework that allows supports to be implemented in schools and school districts, and it focuses on the whole child domain. And what that means is your child isn't just a student. We recognize that they're a family member, a community member, part of a culture. And so we really need to consider all of those identities as a student. And if there's challenges at school, we need to see, is there ways we can support in other areas that may be stemming into the identity of a student, right? And so whole child domain, if we look at RTI and PBIS, like Kathy mentioned, those are just other ways of implementing support. So RTI is going to look at academic support. Is the student needing extra support and interventions, and are they responding to those interventions so to get them the academic support that they need? PBIS is that behavior component. So these are just two popular ways of implementing either academic or behavior support in schools while considering the whole child, because like I said, your student isn't just a student, they're part of a larger community, and those all impact how they respond at school. And so we really want to make sure we have research-based instruction with the belief that all students can learn regardless of socioeconomic status, disability, identity, and their culture, ethnicity, and race. MTSS is geared to support all students.
Okay, so now we're going to get into RTI. As we've mentioned, RTI is that academic framework that falls under the umbrella of MTSS, or a multi-tiered system of support. So if you look at this visual here, this gives you an idea of really what it is. So RTI is a 3-tier system. If you look at the red portion on the bottom, that represents tier 1 intervention. Tier 1 intervention is universal, meaning every student receives tier 1 intervention. So essentially, tier 1 intervention is the learning that's taking place inside the general education classroom with the general education teacher. So as you move up into the tiered system, the interventions get more targeted and more intensive. So if a student is not responding to the intervention happening in the general education classroom in tier 1, they might move into tier 2. And tier 2 intervention becomes more targeted to support those students. Then if a student is not responding to tier 2, they may move into tier 3 intervention. And the thing to keep in mind about tier 3 intervention is that it is intensive and individualized. And we're going to give you more detail on each of these tiers in the next few minutes of this presentation.
So tier 1, you really just want to think all students, universal. This is what the school offers for every student, no matter what. And it's really a proactive and preventative way because, in fact, approximately 80% of students respond to the academic and behavior supports and interventions in tier 1, and that's about where they stay. Some students move on and need a little more support in the different tiers, and we'll go into how that works. But for the most part, if we get the academic and behavior supports set in tier 1, then most students stay there and don't require any other support. So we're thinking of that proactive, preventative way to make sure students get the support they need at tier 1 and don't require any additional support if they don't really need it because we really got them taken care of in tier 1. What we think about in academics, the main thing, something part of tier 1 is universal screening. And so the goal of MTSS is really to identify students early on and get them the support quickly. Universal screening is kind of what happens at the beginning of the year. Savannah uses iReady, and so students will take an assessment at the beginning of the year just to see where they're at, what support do they need at the beginning, and if not, where are they already performing. That gives a really good identification of students who may need support and to kind of filter them through the different tiers if needed. And then also on top of academics, we want to give them high quality and research-based curriculum or classroom instruction. That way students are getting the instruction they need and it's high quality, so we know that the academic piece is sufficient for students. So again, that universal screening gets those students identified and gets them the support they need quickly. For behavior, social emotional learning curriculum is sometimes implemented throughout whole school. So Savannah uses Second Step as their social emotional curriculum. All students receive this information. School-wide behavioral expectations, which Kathy will touch on later, of how schools have maybe a motto or something that really ties in the whole community to set a baseline for behavior expectations. Really having strong classroom management and a consistent discipline approach so that students understand what's expected of them and the behavior that's appropriate at the school. So really just thinking again, universal, all students stay in tier 1. And again, most students usually respond to the supports in tier 1, but if not, we'll move through the different tiers to get them the support they need. So we'll look at tier 2.
Okay, so tier 2, as we talked about before, is more targeted intervention. So while Julia just talked about in tier 1 is universal, typically about 80% of students will respond to universal intervention. But for the students that don't respond, typically about 15% of students might move into tier 2. So the key thing to remember about tier 2 intervention is that it is often supplemental to tier 1. So often students will be receiving tier 1 intervention in the classroom and tier 2 intervention in addition. to tier 1. Another key thing to remember is that it is typically short term. So typically tier 2 interventions are about 6 to 8 weeks long. And throughout those 6 to 8 weeks, the interventionist or teacher or whoever is delivering the intervention is conducting progress monitoring. So they are evaluating the student's progress throughout this short-term intervention. So by the end of the tier 2 intervention, the teacher or interventionist should have a really clear idea of if the student has responded to this or not. So based on that data, the professionals, the staff will take a look at that and decide what are the next steps? How do we go from here? So what can tier 2 intervention look like? It's going to totally depend on the needs of the student and kind of what's happening at the school site. Examples of academic tier 2 intervention include typically small groups, so small leveled groups. It can also include reteaching and reviewing. It can be prompting students, providing extra support in the classroom, potentially by a paraprofessional. It can be group diagnostic assessment. On the behavioral side, tier 2 intervention can sometimes look like reinforcing positive behaviors, providing feedback for negative behaviors, having a behavior support plan in place, or maybe the student needs participation in a social skills group, maybe therapy or counseling. So after those 6 to 8 weeks, the team is really going to take a look at, did the student respond to this intervention or not? And if not, where do we go from here?
Okay, so for tier 3 of RTI, it's intensive and sometimes can be either small group or for individual students. So it's about approximately 5% of students who are considered not responding as well to tier 1 and tier 2 instruction. So what tier 3 looks like, it's higher in frequency. So that student may receive tier 3 academic support or behavior support from anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week, a longer duration. So sometimes at least 30 minutes to more than 30 minutes. And what's important is a low teacher to student ratio. So usually we don't want the groups to be bigger than 5 students. So these students have, a skill gap in academic or behavior achievement. For academic support, it will look like intensive, strategic, and structured practice of core and remediation content. So instead of prompting students to correct their own errors, we would provide direct error correction. Intervention can be provided by a Title I teacher, such as Hanson and Reed have 2 Title I teachers at each of the school, or the education specialist like myself, and we do individual diagnostic assessments to assess the student's strengths and their needs. And then for behavior, if a student is struggling in, self-regulation or anything like that, we can do a functional behavior assessment where the school psychologist goes and observes the student and see, maybe what is activating their behaviors in the classroom or at recess, and come up with strategies and accommodations that can support them in the classroom or at recess, so we see a decrease in those behaviors. And then for students in special education, a behavior intervention plan may be created to support those students as well. And then so, for example, at our district, we have adopted Sunday, which is a reading intervention program that each school in our district has. So Sunday has a maximum of 5 students. It's at least 35 minutes per session, and it's 3 to 5 sessions per week delivered by a Title I teacher or special education teacher to help students with those decoding, phonics skills. And then PBIS, we're going to move into PBIS now. So PBIS, so for example, if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach them. They don't know how to swim, they don't know how to multiply, they don't know how to drive. What we do is teach them, right? If a child doesn't know how to behave, what do? Sometimes it's not as easy for us to finish that last sentence, right? So historically in the past, sometimes students have been punished for their behavior, but education is now moving away from that. We want to reward students for practicing good behavior and not focus on those negative behaviors as much. So at each school in our district, we have a behavior matrix. So for example, Cerritos, they like to focus on being respectful, organized, accountable, and resilient. At Hanson, they're Huskies. They have a lot of pride. They're polite, respectful, integrity, determination, enthusiasm. At Holder, the Hawks are honorable, accountable, welcoming, kind, scholarly. And at Reed, we rock, our Rams rock. We're respectful, own our actions, cooperative, and kind. So what we do is every school has their own PBIS system. So we like to if noon duty supervisors out on recess see a student being respectful, being kind to another student, what they will do is give them a little slip rewarding them for that behavior. And then they take that slip and they enter into a raffle. And then on Friday, the principal or an administrator calls out the names of those students. So we're like rewarding them for their behavior. And then at the beginning of each school year, we do a PBIS walk. So the whole school goes on a walk to different areas, and then we explain what does it mean to be respectful in the lunch area. So being respectful in the lunch area means sitting down, facing the table, keeping your hands and your feet to yourself, not sharing food because you might not be aware of what other child has allergies. So that's examples of being respectful in the lunch area. We also provide non-examples so the students can connect, if you have your feet sticking out at the lunch table, another student might walk by and trip. So we want to reward good behavior.
Okay, so we are going to shift a little bit and talk about something called UDL, or Universal Design of Learning. This is a teaching approach that is embedded into MTSS. So the core purpose of UDL is to make sure that learning is accessible for every single student in the classroom. And this is done through what's called multiple means or multiple ways. So there are three kind of core concepts with UDL: engagement, representation, and action and expression. So this teaching approach looks to adapt the learning to the student. So for example, providing multiple means of engagement in the classroom means you're going to try to engage every student. So you're going to have different ways to engage the students. So for example, one way of engaging students might be embedding the students' interests into the curriculum. Another way of engagement might be embedding the students' culture into the curriculum. Another way of engagement might be doing an activity where the students are out of their chairs, moving around the classroom. But the key concept with UDL is we want to provide multiple methods of engaging so that every student in the classroom is engaged. And this is really the why of learning. So the next core concept is representation, which is the what of learning. And this is presenting content and information in those multiple ways. So typically a teacher in a classroom might be talking to the whole group, right? That's one way of presenting information to students. But there are other ways of presenting information to students also, showing images, showing videos, giving students tactile objects that they can hold and manipulate and problem solve with. So those would be examples of providing multiple means of representation. The third core concept of UDL is action and expression. And this is really the how of learning. So with multiple means of action and expression, we're talking about giving students multiple methods of expressing what they learned. So typically, to express what they learned, students might write down an answer on a test. They might circle a multiple choice answer on a test. But there are other ways for students to express their learning, right? They can give a verbal response of what they learned. They can record a video of themselves expressing what they learned. I once saw a teacher have her students record podcasts talking about what they learned. They can make a comic strip. There are so many ways, but with these three core concepts, the main point of UDL is that this should really be happening in every classroom where multiple means are being used to make the content accessible for every single student.
Yeah. Culturally responsive teaching is where we use the unique strengths of students, especially students of color, to create a more relevant and effective learning experience in the classroom. So I would say Savannah is a very diverse district, and we want to celebrate students of all ethnicities. So in our second step curriculum as well, right now we're learning about equity in the classroom. So teachers want to choose books that celebrate students that look like the same in their classroom. There's been plenty of times where I heard, oh, like this character in the book looks like me. And that really excites the students because they feel like they're getting a fair representation of them as well. So we want to choose books and lessons based on our students and connecting them to what we're teaching them, their background, their interests, their family and home life. So culturally responsive teaching is also consider when we bring native language in the classroom. So if we have a student who's an English language learner who's new from the country, I've seen students make flashcards with the word in English and the word in their native language behind the flashcard to help them increase that vocabulary and language acquisition. We want to understand each student's history and culture. So sometimes at the beginning of the year, teachers will send out a survey where students can fill out telling us more about themselves. And same thing, I send a survey home to parents asking them, what their child was like from their perspective. And then we want family involvement, just like all of you guys are here. And then creating a community culture in the classroom. So I know recently district-wide, our district gave each school a set of books, culturally responsive books, and then each teacher read it to them, and then they came up with a classroom agreement, showcasing that it's okay that we're all different, or it's okay that we make mistakes, things like that. And one example, one of our schools at Twyla Reed, they celebrated Autism Awareness Week for all the students, but all the students were able to create a puzzle piece, showcasing themselves and how we're all unique. We all come from different cultures, but we're still a school and a community.
Okay, so with MTSS, one of the biggest things on the back end to support students is data, because we can assess students at the beginning of the year, see where they're at, but if we kind of just let them go and see how they do, we never know if the support they're getting at whatever tier is working or not. And that really, this data piece is what gives the insight to make the decisions of if students need more support, if is what's working maybe need to be changed a little bit, or we move into a different tier. So the data is really important. Basically, like I said at the beginning, universal screening, so that iReady, maybe something at the beginning of the year, screens all the students, catches any students immediately if they need support, and gets the support they need quickly. And a diagnostic assessment, the second one up here, is a form of a universal screener, just looking at specific skills and knowledge that the student needs. But what I really want to draw your attention to is progress monitoring, that third one here, because that is what keeps the MTSS framework going. So we screen students, and like I said, if you just let them go and don't see what's happening, then we don't really do our job and do the due diligence to the student. Progress monitoring is what it means. You're going to monitor the student as they go through the tiers, receive the supports via academic or behavior, and see if it's working. Maybe we're taking little tests at the end of the week to see, did the student improve in anything? Or we're taking observation data for behavior, monitoring, did the student's behavior improve? How often are they engaging in what we want them to do or not want them to do? Just to see, can we move through different tiers if needed, so students can get the support they need. So progress monitoring and universal screening are those two key important parts of database decision making in MTSS, because it really drives the decision making instead of just kind of coming up with things on our own. It's backed by what we see in the data. So those are the two things to take away from that.
Okay, so now we're going to move into talking about what is an SST. So SST typically stands for Student Success Team. And it's important to know that an SST is a function of general education. So what is it? Essentially, It is a team whose purpose is to identify effective interventions for a student. So a student that needs extra support, an SST can be created. And a key element of an SST is that it should be a collaboration between the school and family. So the purpose is to generate effective interventions. And then once the SST is created, regularly scheduled meetings should be held between the student success team. They should be regularly scheduled, structured meetings, and these meetings are held to address those students' individualized needs. And those can be academic needs or behavioral needs. So who is on an SST? It is going to depend on the individualized needs of the student and then the resources available at the school site. So it'll look a little bit different at every school site, but typically the parents or family is a member of the SST, the student's general education classroom teacher. And then in addition to that, a grade level representative can be a part of the team, an administrator can be a part of the team, and other school staff, including a school psychologist, education specialist, or speech language pathologist. And again, this depends on what are the concerns for the student and what are their needs.
Okay, so MTSS and special education go hand in hand in that tier 3 area. So at this point, if students have gone through tier 2, data was taken and it shows that the student's still not making adequate progress, students will move to tier 3 and receive more intensive and targeted intervention. At this point, special education may be part of the plan with the team in terms of having a special education evaluation. And so it's a part of tier 3. It doesn't mean it's automatically going to happen at tier 3. It kind of just depends on what the data is showing, what the team feels that the student needs, and of course the student and the family as well. At this point, it's not mandatory. It just depends on what the data shows. So the student comes to tier 3 with a lot of data. At this point, there's lots of documentation and data showing the student hasn't made adequate progress. So then the team can consider, what more can we try? Can we make it more intensive, or is an evaluation necessary? And like I said before, MTSS is set up for all students. So students with disabilities benefit from the MTSS process. It really makes sure that when students get to tier 3, they're there because they really do require intensive support, not just because we didn't try enough in the other tiers or they didn't receive what they were supposed to. Students with disabilities receive a lot of benefits from MTSS with its sustained academic performance, reduced behavior problems, and reduced inappropriate referrals to special education, meaning they didn't just come here to tier 3 and we didn't try our best in the other tiers. They really mean to come here at tier 3 and we see there's extra support needed. And so an evaluation could be a way to go. But again, it's with the team, it's decided together, looking at the data and seeing what the student really needs. So that is in the tier 3 areas where you see special education come up. And again, it's for all students. So it's not just singling out students with disabilities, but identifying students who may need more support, and that could be an option as well.
Okay. So this is how to support your child at home. So in order to then ensure the success of each child, we need parents like you to be part of the process and the solution as well. So definitely read with your child or listen to your child read for at least 20 minutes per day. Monitor and assist your child with your child's homework assignments. So at parent-teachers conference, it's important to review any data. So their assignments, their quizzes, their tests, and also iReady data. So we do at the beginning of the year, and then we do it at benchmark time. So at every trimester level to see their growth and improvement, and if there's any concerns that the school team needs to address. That you can learn more about our school's curriculum and interventions being used. So for language arts, we use Benchmark Advanced, and then for math, we use Go Math. Social emotional learning, we use Second Step, and then our interventions include Sunday and Touch Math. So definitely maintain regular communication with your child's teacher and attend parent-teacher conferences and any meetings related to your child. So if you hear that your school is inviting you to an SST meeting, that is definitely important to come.